And I want to welcome everyone to the September. Can it really be September? The September lunch bunch that we have every first Wednesday, usually of the month. And as you hopefully saw in the blurb, we're going to talk a little bit, nope, a lot of bit today about AI, artificial intelligence. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Karen Solheim. I'm the GAE retired secretary at this point in time. And it was Tony Smith, who was our president and now is the retired vice president, who worked on, she was part of the NEA Representative Assembly and worked on reading the AI policy that had been put together by NEA. And so Stacy, and is it Palika?
It's Pelica, but yeah.
Pelica, I put the accent on the wrong syllable.
Yeah, everyone does.
Stacy from NEA is here today and to tell us everything or not, or give us an overview of AI and what we should know about it, because I would say it's Greek to me, but I'm not sure it's Greek either. So Stacy, thank you so much for being here. And do you want to do questions as we go, or do you want people to put them in the chat? What's the best for you?
I'll pause for questions. There are kind of 3 sections of the presentation, so I'll pause after each one.
That sounds great. Stacy, thank you again.
Yep. Thanks. Good morning, everyone, or almost afternoon. As Karen said, my name is Stacy Pelica. Thanks for having me. I am the director of the research department at NEA, which is part of the Education Policy and Implementation Center. One of the things that I've been doing over the last year is working closely on the topic of AI in education. I was one of the coordinators of, on the staff side of our AI task force, which I'll talk about during this presentation. Got up to speed in a pretty major way on this topic and what AI is and what it means for educators. And so it's, my pleasure to share that with you all today. I will say, the presentation I'm going to do today, we've done versions of it with a lot of different groups of members at this point, and folks do feel considerably more comfortable with the topic afterwards. So it's a good introduction. If you already know a little bit about AI, you will probably learn some new things. If you are like, I don't even know what this is, you will definitely learn some stuff. So let's get started. So this is the definition of AI that the task force came up with. That AI is a machine-based systems that are designed around human-defined objectives. And so one thing that we've really been stressing is that there is a human involved, and actually humans involved at multiple points in the process in an AI system. So they're defined around human-defined objectives. That could be student learning, that could be optimizing a bus route, that could be supporting student mental health. It could be any number of things. We'll talk about those later. So to perform tasks that would otherwise require human or animal intelligence. We had one member of our task force who is a computer scientist and really stressed that while we often think of AI as only simulating human intelligence, often it is simulating other sorts of animals as well. And so it's not just human. And we'll talk about specific examples throughout this presentation. I will guarantee you will say, oh, I actually have already used AI and did not even know it. So getting to that, in general, there are 3 different types of AI that we talk about. The first is reactive. And so if you have an Alexa or a Roomba, anything that responds to a specific input or situation without learning from past experiences. So it's not updating its model. It's just saying, I'm not going to run into a wall. Oh, there's a wall. I'm not going to run into a wall. Oh, there's another wall. I'm not going to run into a wall. It's not necessarily becoming smarter about how it's routing itself, but it is smart enough to know not to run into things, to stay on the carpet, whatever it is that you need. The second type, which is really pretty pervasive and has been for quite a few years now, is predictive AI. And this is any tool that analyzes historical data to predict future events. And so when Netflix comes up and says, like, hey, you like witty dramas with strong female leads, here's 10 more of those. That's a machine learning model at work, crunching all this data and saying, if you like this, you'll generally like this. Amazon does the same thing. When you see those, like, if you're interested in this, you might be interested in all these other products that are exactly the same. Or if you use Spotify, and it says, here's a mix of new music that's very similar to the music you already like. But what we've been really talking about and where things got very kind of prominent in the media over the last year or two has been generative AI. So generative AI generates new content or outputs from learned patterns. And so when you hear about ChatGPT, Gemini, Microsoft Copilot, there are many, many, many other examples of this. These are all tools that are creating new content from scratch. And the way that they're doing it is through statistical modeling, basically by predicting what the most likely next word would be, or what you think the image should look like. So it's taking in a bunch of data. One good example I use is, it's both a positive and a negative example, is that I have been testing ChatGPT about average teacher salaries, which is a number that my department produces every year. So if you go to ChatGPT and you say, what is the average teacher salary in the United States? It will give you a really well-written paragraph because it has sucked in a bunch of reports on the web about average teacher salaries, so it knows the language to use. But the last time I checked, and I should check it again because it's been a little bit, it'll give you this number that sounds completely plausible, but is not correct. And it cites NEA. And so it says, according to the National Education Association, the average teacher salary is number that sounds plausible, but is not the number we publish. So it's not perfect, but it is, as some members of our task force have said, today is the worst it's ever going to be. It is getting better and better and better. And so there are some really kind of jaw-dropping examples of AI-created videos where you would not be able to tell that these people are not real people until suddenly, like, a chair folds up and disappears, or you realize that these wolf puppies playing are morphing between there being 3 and 5 of them. And so, like, it's very good, but it is not perfect. So looking specifically at education, what we're seeing in the education space is a lot of personalized learning, differentiation. So how can you translate, language translation be an example of that? Or for students with disabilities, a lot of movement in that space towards differentiating instruction to student interests, student needs, increased student persistence. So, if you have an iPhone, you've played a game and it's like giving you that little serotonin hit, same thing happens for students, for good or bad. Handwriting conversion, text to speech and speech to text. So again, the students with disabilities space is really booming around AI tools. One of the kind of most promising and touching examples I saw was a student who was had very minimal verbal ability, but his parents could understand him. And so they got a machine learning model to learn what he was saying and be able to translate that so he could fully participate in the classroom. And so he would, make a verbal noise, and the machine learning model, because his parents already knew how to translate it, would translate that into speech that his students and educators could understand. So a lot of really fascinating things going on. It is not, at least at this point, replacing teachers, and we'll talk about how in the policy statement we really focus on the need to stay human-centered in education. It's not going to solve every problem we have. We hope it is not one more thing that needs to take a lot of time. And we'll talk about AI literacy. We are not seeing it as a subject that is separate from other subjects. So it's something that you can use in an English classroom. It's something you can use in a foreign language classroom. It's something you can use in a science classroom. a lot like the internet revolution. You know, and I went to elementary school before there was an internet, and high school. You know, it is a tool that we are learning how to incorporate rather than a separate thing. So I'll stop here for a moment. Any questions about what AI is, how it works, what it's doing? Okay, I will move on. So when we think through AI in classroom practice, there are two different ways we're approaching it. One is learning with AI. So how is AI being used with students and educators? And then learning about AI, which is the idea of AI literacy and making sure that educators understand what AI is, that students understand what it is, and pros and cons, when it should be used and when it shouldn't be used. So I'll start with learning with AI, and then I'll talk about learning about AI, and then I'll pause for more questions. So learning with AI, this chart was a survey that was done by RAND in 2023, 2024. And you can see here that at this point, this is teachers who are using and not using AI as part of their teaching. So 19% are using it in some way. That's the blue part in the lower right. 66% are not using it at all. Some of that group are using it in their personal lives, but they are not using it in the classroom. We've got 15% who have tried it. Right now, we are seeing that the most used products are some virtual learning platforms, again, adaptive learning systems for students with disabilities, and chatbots like ChatGPT. And I'll provide an example, and I'll send my slides along so that you can follow up on these. But I'll show you a sheet in a second, or a slide in a second, that has like a whole bunch of different tools just designed specifically for educators. And some of them are pretty amazing in terms of like designing lesson plans and designing tests and things like that. So it's starting to take off, but again, we're still very much at the beginning. Here's that slide I talked about. If you, when I send the slide deck around, you can actually click on these and go directly to the site. The boxes are linked. The one most people tend to start with and really find fascinating is Magic School. Magic School is a whole suite of really interesting AI-driven tools for teachers. But there are ones that are content specific. Lit Lab here is aimed at early learners in terms of phonics and early literacy, and helping students create their own flashcards. There are, ChatGPT, Claude Gemini, these kind of do everything ones, which, it is kind of fun when you're like, write a song in the style of, whatever your favorite band is about bananas. And they like, it does that, it's pretty amazing what it can do. There are, presentation tools. And note down here at the bottom, we are not endorsing any apps. So do not take this as a sales pitch to use any of these. This is very much this is what is out there. I will say, having been at a number of AI kind of tech events, one of the things we are seeing is that while some developers do actively work with educators, some of them don't really understand that educators have knowledge and skills they do not have. And so one of the things we're really pushing for is making sure that developers include educators, from the very beginning of the design process, that these tools are designed to solve the problems that educators have, not the ones that tech developers think educators have. And often one thing that we see is that there's a lot of focus on what I think of as like the sexier, like teaching and learning stuff, when really what we hear from educators is like, I need some help with these administrative burdens, like getting through paperwork, or, IEPs, or grading, or, like these kind of more fundamental tasks. So we're doing a lot of work around making developers more aware of the grand scope of educators' needs and how this can help. So there are benefits and risks. We always try and highlight both in this presentation. We think that AI has a lot of promise, but it is certainly has some risks involved. And so, for benefits, we've got, again, the content development and differentiation. You can write test questions tailored to a student's specific interests. You can do all sorts of really interesting tweaks to kind of engage students and make them interested in the classroom. Assessment design and timely, effective feedback. There are some interesting grading tools, and some of the better designed ones are made. One that I saw a demo of, their idea was that the AI would do an initial kind of assessment, but then the teacher and the student would sit down together and kind of interrogate what the AI said. It's like, was the AI correct? Because as I've already mentioned, it's not always right. Tutoring and personalized learning assistance. So these models are really good at kind of figuring out what part of a, let's say you're doing mathematics, like what step you're getting caught on, and like kind of helping you work through that. Aiding creativity, collaboration, and skill development. Our task force members were doing some really cool things with AI. We had one teacher in Maine who is having her students make movies, and they're using, they'd come up with an idea and then use AI to help kind of plan out the screenplay, and then use an AI voice modification tool to do the voiceover. So it had that, like, in a world where blah, 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 like kind of voice. And so it's just some cool things. And then operational and administrative efficiency. So, how do we, optimize bus routes, and so that, everyone gets where they need to go? How do we schedule, put together a course schedule in a way that that works? So there's some interesting advances in that as well. But of course, there are risks. So plagiarism and academic dishonesty, this has gotten a lot of attention. One of the interesting things is that there are some studies out there showing that it's not necessarily that more students are cheating. It's that the students who are cheating have an easier way to cheat. And so, having talked to kids in my own life, they're very aware of this tool. They're also aware that, they probably shouldn't be using it to write their papers. But we are at an interesting point right now where a lot of the tools that exist to identify writing written with AI is not very good, because again, AI is not perfect. And so there is not really a great way to identify AI written products. There have been some cases where educators have used those tools and have been wrong, and that has had consequences for students. And so sorting out, and I'll show a thing in a second, that's a great tool to use in the classroom to help students understand, like, when it's okay and when it's not okay. Diminished student and teacher agency and accountability. This gets back to the need to be human-centered. We certainly do not see an educational system where students are sitting in front of computers and that is their education. That is not healthy. That is not based in what we know about learning science. So we need to make sure that students are still accountable for their knowledge. A very important study just came out not long ago showing that it's important to look at if students are actually understanding the content. And so, they can whip through an online game or something like that. And then if you ask them to do, that kind of math problem later, they don't remember it. And so we have to really map out, like, what is the role for this, and making sure that students are still accountable for their learning, and that educators likewise are accountable for supporting that. Student privacy and unauthorized data collection. This is huge, and something I will very briefly kind of go through federal legislation on this. AI needs a lot of data to work well. Lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of data. There have been already discussions about how ChatGPT has kind of run out of things to mine on the web. And there are some intellectual property issues. And so, a lot of academics are saying, hey, like, my writing is my writing. That's my intellectual property. You can't just take that and then use that to feed ChatGPT writing something that sounds like what I wrote. The SAG-AFTRA strike was around the same issues of, the rights to your own image. Like, can you replace, let's say you have a bunch of extras in a movie, you film them, and they're like, oh, we can just pull these people out and put them in our model and just create fake extras and not have to pay them. So there are a lot of issues around data and kind of this double-edged sword of the system needs data to work well, but yet how are you making sure that that is not overstepping bounds in terms of property rights, data security, which is another big issue, and so on. So this is a big, I could do a whole presentation. In fact, I'm doing a whole presentation just next week on this topic. Over-reliance and loss of critical thinking. This has been something I've kind of hammered home over and over, is that what AI right now, at least, is good at teaching is not those critical thinking skills. It's, kind of the basic skills, which students do need to learn, but we need to make sure that education goes beyond that. And in fact, in a future where AI is going to be part of the workplace, we need students to understand and be able to think critically about when to use AI and when not to use it, how to evaluate the content that they're getting from AI. And so we need to be able to hone those skills, and using AI is not really the way to do that. And then societal bias. There is a lot of research about how AI right now is biased towards white communities, towards the West, towards English-speaking populations, towards people without disabilities. I mean, there's basically every bias you can think of. There's some really compelling data showing that the demographics of developers is heavily skewed towards white, heterosexual, cisgender men who are under the age of 40. I mean, it's like more than I even thought it was. So really making sure that the developer pool becomes more diverse, that the data being used accurately represents a diversity of experiences, and that we're looking for that bias. I think one of the issues with the developer pool is that if you're a 25-year-old white guy in Silicon Valley, you're not necessarily looking for these biases that someone else would notice pretty readily. So this just really briefly is the classroom scale that I mentioned. This was shared by one of our task force members, and I've got the little citation at the bottom. So there are starting to be some really good tools out there just to sit down with students and say, okay, for this assignment, we're not using AI at all, or you can use it to help edit your work. When I was writing, putting together the task force report, at the very end, I used Grammarly, which is AI based, to do a final check on the grammar. So like there are different gradations of when you can use it and when you don't. And this lays it out really nicely in a clear way that you can have a conversation with folks about it. Shifting to learning about AI, there's a lot of conversation going on right now. There is an National AI Literacy Day now. The first one was in April. I'll provide a link to that in a second. And there are a lot of different frameworks. This is Digital Promises, which is just nice because it's 3 easy prongs. And there's some of them are, 12 circles and a bigger circle and another circle. This one's nice and straightforward. So do you understand AI? Do you understand how it works? That it's not thinking like we think. It is really just predicting the most likely next word based on past data it has taken in. Do you know how to use AI? A lot of discussion has happened around like prompts. How do you write a really effective prompt? And that's a skill that I will say I'm still working on. And something that I'm sure will be more prominent in the classroom going forward. Just like we all learned how to use Google to search online. However long ago now, I'm feeling older. 40 years ago, was that 40 years ago? 35 years ago? A long time ago. And then how do you evaluate the use of AI? And so, we'll talk about in the task force report, we talk about the environmental impacts are actually quite great. And so, is it worth it? At one point, I made a AI generated Muppet image of my dog, and but I felt guilty doing it because I know how much of an environmental impact generating an AI image has. And so, it's like, is my like brief excitement about seeing my dog in Muppet form worth it, to the broader world? And so, or is it worth it societally, like if this is going to, there's already a lot of talk about social media, um, and now adding to that, like deep fakes, where these AI generated images of students are being shared, that it's causing a lot of psychological damage and social harm. So really being able to engage in those conversations. So in terms of learning about AI, I will say right now it is, again, really at the early stages. 71% of teachers in a March survey said they had received absolutely no professional development about AI. So you all on this call, if you would like to call this PD, are head of the game. 18% said that they had a one-time session. 6% said they had more than that, and 5% had some sort of ongoing training. So this is really not something that has moved forward very much. NEA is talking with ISTE about working with them on some professional development. We did a webinar series in the spring on AI and education. So we're exploring where we can be of help in this area. And also teachers were less likely to have received this professional development if they work in an urban district or an elementary school, or in a school where students are more likely to be receiving free and reduced price lunch. So we're already seeing some inequity in access to this content. So I mentioned ISTE, the International Society of Technology and Education. They have a lot of really great resources about this topic. They have a blended learning course. Educator Circles is a grant-funded program I think might be wrapping up, but did a really nice series of blog posts, including some on AI and equity. And then AI for Education is an organization that is doing a lot of training. I mentioned National AI Literacy Day, and they have their asynchronous PD link here. So all these organizations plus others shared a bunch of resources that the AI Literacy Day folks have compiled. So if you want to learn more, that's a great place to start. Same thing for students. They have curriculum resources at that same site. And another great place to look if you're interested in seeing examples of how districts are moving on this is AIPolicyLab.org. This group, Innovate EDU, is working with districts around the country who have decided that they are interested in being AI policy labs and figuring out how to implement this. And so Gwinnett County in Georgia is one of those labs, and they actually have, they are very much at the forefront. They have like an AI focused magnet kind of school curriculum pathway. They have an AI learning framework. They have a whole bunch of stuff that a lot of districts, most districts do not have at this point. And so we're starting to see some examples, and you can see here that Gwinnett is not only doing kind of the mathematical data science kind of techie part of this, but also ethics, creative problem solving, like how do we use this in across the curriculum and really interrogate when and how we're using it. And I will pause after this slide. We're also seeing some other uses of AI in education. I mentioned some of the administrative stuff in terms of streamlining operations, communications. Some people are starting to use it to write emails. I will say that I have a friend who's a faculty member, and he was like, I got like the nicest "I can't be in class today" email I've ever gotten. And then I got 5 more that sounded exactly like it, so there's kind of this question of like, is the snake eating the tail? You know, like, are we just going to end up in this mushy world of everything sounding the same, which is not, I think, where any of us wants to be. Mental health, I think, is interesting. You know, I'm sure you are all aware that there are not enough mental health staff in schools, and there have been some efforts to explore using technology in that area. You know, I think, you know, the preferred solution is having enough mental health staff in schools, but you know, seeing where this goes and making sure that again, there's educator voice and making sure that this is enhancing and rather than replacing person-to-person communications. School safety, another topic that is challenging. So there are now systems you can buy as a district that put up cameras around your school and then analyzes, like, does that bulge in a backpack look like a gun? You know, things like that, where it will analyze images. But there's also, getting back to the bias problem, evidence that there's bias against students of color in some of these systems. And, you know, there's again, that trade-off of privacy. It's like, do you want metal detectors at the school door? Or do you want the system that's constantly monitoring and analyzing data from cameras around the school? And that's, you know, I could argue that either way. There's pros and cons to both of those. And then admissions and enrollment. This is something we'll be looking at, especially in higher ed, but also in, you know, things like charter schools and places where, you know, magnets, like, are you relying on an algorithm? And one of the things we say in the task force report is that we don't think AI alone should make any decisive decisions. It's a same word twice, but anyway, anything that is like determinative in terms of tracking, in terms of enrollment, in terms of employment, like, all of that has to have a human involved. And we feel very strongly about that. So I will pause here. I'm going to talk about policy next and the task force report, but any questions about the AI learning with or about AI piece?
Well, I'll ask Stacy that, you know, you said, oh, there needs to be a human involved in the last one or whatever.
Mhm.
But in all of this, there aren't the AI police. Like, so what's to keep the forces from of evil from going through and saying, well, you know, thank you for these recommendations, and you know, I'm going to do what I want to do. And
Yep. Yeah, that is a great question. You know, right now, I will say there's no AI police. And if we lived in Europe, the situation would be a little different. They have much stronger data privacy regulations in Europe. Although I don't know that it would prevent, let's say, AI from making a hiring decision. I think it would in Europe, but the panel I'm on next week is interesting. It's the Virginia Labor Employee Relations Association. And so the panel I'm on actually has an HR specialist. We're going to be talking about that exact dilemma. Like, where is the legal standing on that? Where is the policy? And, you know, right now it's not there, but there are a lot of people kind of trying to figure out how to make policy at the federal level, at the state level. And there's a lot of talk about guardrails. You'll hear the word guardrails like a million times in the AI world. So, like, what are the guardrails for the uses or not? So I know that's an unsatisfying answer, but it's where we're at this point. And there's a lot of conversation about that exact question. Any other questions on this?
well, I have one more because I'll monopolize unless somebody else pops up. So the AI world must literally be changing at light speed.
Yes.
And what wasn't true when we started this presentation, I mean, something new has happened in the last 35 minutes we've been together.
Absolutely.
So how do you even so there's no static point really from which to work. So how do you do?
Yeah, I call it for the last year, I feel like I've just had like a fire hose of AI information like in my face all the time because like there's no stop to it. It's like always like some new thing coming out. Um, and it, you know, I think at this point, I think the generative AI stuff was like a big, huge burst. And now we're kind of like, okay, where does that go? So at least, that it's getting better and better, but it's still the same thing. And I think that has helped us kind of slow down enough to say, okay, what does this really mean? But yeah, it's hard, and I think it is harder in the US because, and especially in schools, because we don't have a national education system. We have 13,000 plus districts that are embedded in states that have a Department of Education that only has so much control over what's happening. And so you'll see in a second that just under half of states at this point have some sort of guidance around AI in education, but even then, that's very I would say loose for the most part. It's like, it's this presentation only in a. So I think we're still at the point of how do you create something, and this was something that came up with our policy statement. How do you create something that is what is needed, but not so specific that it can't adapt to the changes that are inevitably coming? And I think that's
You ladies are looking great. I'm like,
so yeah, it's like I think a lot of this guidance is going to have to be flexible enough that it can accommodate shifts as they happen. Yep. Okay, so moving on, because that's a great bridge to the policy stuff. What is happening is that AI is already in schools. It's showing up in Grammarly, I already mentioned, ChatGPT. Some districts have embraced it, those policy labs, others have banned it. Some of those have then backtracked. There's a lot of like, what is this? What does this mean? Fears and misconceptions have to be navigated. It's very much like the internet. It's like everyone has to get up to speed at once. And if you have a superintendent or a school leader who is a little more knowledgeable, you're probably in a better place than someone who's just starting from scratch. Similarly, like I showed, most teachers and other educators have not had any professional development on this. So there's everyone's kind of getting up to speed. Many states, I've mentioned this, don't provide guidance yet. The ones in dark blue have guidance from the state Department of Education. Arizona's was done by Northern Arizona University, Michigan. There's a working group that did some guidance. And then Tennessee did an interesting approach, which their guidance was districts have to come up with guidance, but we're not going to help them do it. So good luck. Like you're required to do this, but we are not going to provide you with anything to help you. So there's some blended approaches. Georgia has not released anything yet, but this is again one of those things that like every day I have data current as of yesterday. It might not be current right now because these things get released all the time. So our own guidance at NEA, this is the task force. Noelle Candelaria led the task force. We had ESPs, teachers, a school psychologist, higher ed faculty, executive committee members. We did a whole range of engagements at the leadership summit, at ESP conference, higher ed conference. EPIC, my center, led this along with our Center for Professional Excellence in Student Learning. So the folks that do teacher quality and education support professional quality. And so a great group of people. Our policy statement. So again, I'll send this along. This QR code links to our website that has the full report and all of our stuff on this. But we have 5 guiding principles in the policy statement. The first one is that students and educators have to remain at the center of education. I've already mentioned that. Again, it is not good learning science to remove human interaction from education. Another thing that I have mentioned in many rooms on this topic is that education isn't just learning content. It's learning how to work with other people. It's, social dynamics. It's learning how to be a good citizen. It's, all sorts of other things. And also educators are so important in identifying other sorts of health issues, both physical and mental health, understanding family dynamics. I mean, there's just so much more to education than like learning how to do math. So really making sure that those human connections remain key. And one thing I haven't mentioned yet is that we have a kind of a broken record at this point in a lot of these spaces at pointing out that education support professionals and other school staff are important in this process. A lot of folks focus on teachers. And, I keep saying, if you're talking about students with disabilities, you have to talk about paraeducators. You have to, if you're talking about any school, you have to talk about social workers and psychologists. You have to talk about, the health staff. You have to talk about, what this means for operations and clerical staff and, transportation staff. So we are really pushing to make sure that there's a more holistic view of education in these conversations. The second principle is that we really want to see evidence that this technology is enhancing the educational experience. And so it's not that, oh, it's fun. Like how many film strips did I watch as a kid? Like sometimes I learned something and sometimes it was just, a way to spend a half hour. We want to see that that an AI tool is actually enhancing what is happening and not substituting. And the evidence, it's hard at this point because it's such a new field, but there is some good research out there about like, when does it enhance and when doesn't it enhance? And really taking a good look at that and helping. One of the links I'll share later, Common Sense Media, is starting to rate tools, which is great. So having some people in the space who are really looking and saying, okay, this particular tool does what it says it's going to do and really enhances things. Ethical development and use of AI technology and strong data protection practices. I think I've already covered this pretty well, but making sure that we are cognizant of the biases, that we're mitigating bias and risk, that we're protecting student and educator data. There are some pretty shocking stats about the extent to which schools are a target for cyber security threats because they have so much data. Fourth principle is equitable access to and use of tools. And so it's not just enough that there is a computer where you can get on the internet and go to ChatGPT. We want to make sure that it's not that some students are using it to do kind of rote tutoring systems and, other kids are getting to, creating new movies or new, scientific, tools or doing really cool creative things. Yeah, Kimberly.
You're muted, Kim.
Oh, yeah. Hi.
Hi.
Really just a compliment is the fact that the NEA task force has included a school psychologist is very, very enheartening to me because so many times we are left out of that arena, helping to plan on the educational systems and things that are happening. And I was really curious about the safety with the the fact that the AI is able to patrol or kind of like look at the cameras throughout the school day versus just having an entry point of where you have the screener when you come into the schools. Could you tell me a little more about that, the places that maybe have done just the cameras versus having the door screeners when they first come in?
Sure. I don't have a good name of a district off the top of my head, but I will say that I went to many of a sales pitch at conferences for places that were selling these tools. And so, the idea is that, there's networked cameras all around the school and they're, sort of just taking footage all the time. And then the AI is trained to assess the images and kind of pick out anything that looks like it could be suspicious and then alert the school security staff. And so it's an automated process that just sort of runs all the time. And because these systems can process, you could have a security guard sitting and looking at all the cameras, but instead the computer is able to do it much more quickly and kind of do it across multiple images at the same time. And so, yeah, it's something that is out there, and some schools are using. And in some places, the argument is that it's, makes for a friendlier, more open school environment than having metal detectors. And yet, on the other hand, it is also surveilling students all the time, which has its own drawbacks.
Right. I can see both sides of that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you.
Yep. And then our last principle is making sure that AI literacy is available to all educators and all students, that it's ongoing, because again, this technology changes like daily, hourly, by the second, and that there's also agency and voice in this process. So Gwinnett County, which I mentioned, has a student board that talks about the use of AI in the schools. And so, like, how do you make sure that there is that engagement and voice in this process? Two areas that I've mentioned, and so I want to leave some time for questions. I'll just say briefly that we focus on in the report and the policy statement are students and educators with disabilities, and the issues of climate change and environmental impacts of this technology. We think that this has a lot of promise about inclusion of students and educators with disabilities. But again, we don't, special education has always been an area where it's hard to get sufficient staffing. We do not want AI to replace a good teacher for those students. And then for AI and climate change, the environmental impacts are pretty shocking. And so thinking through how to make sure that people are aware of that and are weighing those, negative effects when they are choosing to use AI. I will not go through all of these, but there are a lot of federal regulations that touch on AI. So FERPA about data privacy, COPPA requires parental consent, IDEA, which I shouldn't have to tell anyone on this call about. I'm sure you all know that. Section 504. So these are all existing regulations that have not been updated to reflect AI, but in some way speak to the use of AI. But there are big holes. And so what is happening right now is there's a lot of discussion about the American Privacy Rights Act of 2024. I've given you a link here if you want to go into that rabbit hole of digging into federal policy about data privacy. But part of that is updating COPPA to reflect the modern environment. So a lot of these regulations were created, at the dawn of the internet age or even before that. And so making sure that we reflect current needs and reality. And then this QR code will take you to this list online. These are some of the folks that are doing a lot of work in this area on the policy front. So Department of Ed has a great report. It was the first thing we had the task force read because it just provides such a good overview. EdSafe AI Alliance is a group that we're part of that is doing a lot of policy work in this area. Teach AI, you saw that I used some of their slides. They have some great resources for policy and practice and kind of things that you can give to a district leader to get up to speed. ISTE, I already mentioned, has a lot of curriculum and literacy resources. Education International, if you want to see the international side of it. And then, more and more groups, both national and international. And then down here is Common Sense Media, which I mentioned is doing some rating of different software tools. And that is my presentation. I will share this slide deck, so you do not need to copy down any of that information. And I think I stopped sharing, and I should be back with y'all now.
You did, and you are. What questions remain unanswered that you would like to ask Stacy? Well, I'll ask one, the the science fiction person in me goes down to open the pod bay door, Hal, and the computer doesn't, will AI outsmart humans?
Yes. Yeah, OECD. So I do some international work with the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, and they have been testing AI with its they do an assessment of adult learning, and the AI is getting really close to just acing it. So um, that said, the thing I keep coming back to is that AI is really good at certain things. It is not, um, it's not great at being social at this point. It's not great at, like there are nuances in um, the way humans think and interact that AI cannot do. So, so yeah, I don't want to send us down into the future of our robot masters, but it is getting really smart. And yeah.
Well, and our GAE vice president put in the chat about AI using to create those lesson plans, which I'm not trying to malign administrators, but sometimes, people don't read the documents created. And so, what is there any harm in saying, hey, do me an 11th grade American Lit lesson plan for 180 days of instruction, and using teacher time, educator time in to actually teach students rather than to be pushing the paperwork.
Yeah. Well, and that comes right back to, that idea that it's important to talk to educators about what problems they want to solve. And often what we hear is it's that administrative burden. It's not like they want to spend time with students. That's why they got into teaching. They want to teach, they want to educate, they want to support, they want to do all these things. They don't want to do a bunch of paperwork. And I used to be a higher ed faculty member. Like I hated grading, and you do need to do some of it. Like I don't think this should be handed over completely to AI, but you have a stack of papers and it's 9 o'clock at night. You're like, well, it'd be nice to have some help here. And one of the other topics that I help lead here at NEA is educator shortages. And so we are at a point where I could do a whole other presentation on this, that we know that teachers are more stressed than other workers. We know that and it's job related stress. And so are there ways that this technology could help alleviate some of those burdens to make it a more attractive career? Like, hopefully, yes. Patrick.
Yes, I want to put it in perspective, because I remember when I was working for Steinmart back in the 90s, they had AI even back then, because they were scheduling our shifts.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to work according to what we put in. So it's not new.
No.
And then I also look at science fiction movies. Yeah, we see some where they take over like iRobot, but then you also see where they are like an alien, and what's the other one? Prometheus, where they're actually helping the humans because they can only do what the humans program them to do. So I think that is one thing that we have to be careful of, is that we don't give them that kind of autonomy, but we have to make sure that we follow. And the one thing that concerned me more than anything is with AI, our students won't learn. They will have their work done for them. And that's the scariest thing as an educator.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think we're at a moment. So you are absolutely right that AI has been around for, like Netflix, it's been around for decades, Amazon, like all these, predictive things. And And I think the generative AI is really the big shift, where people are like, wait a minute, like it can write a paper that sounds like a paper a person would write. And that piece of it, like, I think we're at the point where we really need to think through what students need to know and know how to do, in a workforce where this technology is available. Like it's, I think of it as similar to calculators. Like calculators, like you still want students to understand math, like, but I have actually like 2 calculators right here. Like I'm not hand doing, arithmetic, but I understand what I'm doing, and so we have to think through, what content and skills it's important for students to know, and what sorts of things AI is going to be able to do for them. And so they need to learn how to use the AI correctly to do those things. Yeah, we're in this kind of pivotal moment of sorting through like what education means. I think, thinking yet another thing I led for a while is like looking at the research around COVID. I don't think anyone came out of the pandemic saying, oh, well, a great educational model is students sitting at screens all day. Like, let's do more of that, So yeah, I think that's influencing how we're thinking about this as well. Like one of the questions in the chat is, problematic uses of AI for teachers. I think one of the things, so going back to AI is not always correct. There's a really interesting flow chart in the report, about when you should and shouldn't use AI. And the very first question is, does it matter whether the answer is factually correct? And if the answer is no, then it's like, go ahead, do whatever you want with AI. But if it's yes, then it's like, okay, well, are you able to evaluate whether this is correct? Does it matter if you're wrong in your evaluation? Like, so like thinking through, maybe it makes sense to use for lesson planning, but it doesn't make sense to use, if you're, writing up a summary of a historical event, so like there's that AI literacy piece again of like when to use it and when not to use it.
Stacy, we're nearing the end of our
Yeah.
hour and we kind of have a hard stop
Okay.
at 12:30. I want to just say thank you.
Yeah.
This has been so informative and I appreciate your giving your time today.
Yep.
And I just want to share briefly with you, if you are a GAE retired or pre-retired member, you should have gotten that you're in the loop for September on Labor Day. And there's a link in here. We're going to be participating in the National Voter Registration Day in September and monitoring the TRS board meeting at the end of September. October 7th is the last day to register to vote for this upcoming presidential election. But I encourage you to be in the know about the state health benefit retiree option change period, which starts October 15th. You have to do active enrollment this time for the state health benefit program. If you do not, you're going to be defaulted to the lowest cost plan. And this particular slide links to this PowerPoint. And I'll just show you one slide on this. A lot of us have for our Medicare Advantage used United Healthcare for the past few years, and it's been free. For 2025, it's not going to be free. There is a cost. But if you don't make an election, a selection during open enrollment, there is this member who failed to do that, you're going to be defaulted to the lowest cost plan. So you can look at the list of the 4 options and you're going to go through and you're going to be defaulted to Anthem Standard. So spread the word near and far that you really do have to be participatory in this year's open enrollment period starting in October. With that, I'm going to say it's 12:30. Thank you very much. We'll do the next GAE Retired Lunch Bunch on October 2nd. Look for communications. We're shoring up the speaker now. And Stacy, again, thank you. This has been most beneficial in my world.
Thanks for
Thank
having me.
you. And I hope everybody else has gotten something you can share when you're doing coffee and conversation later on. So thank you so much, everyone. See you next month. Bye-bye.